Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Agents of Hope podcast. I'm your host, Tim Cox. I'm a trainee educational psychologist and I am passionate and really interested in the psychology of hope and social change and all of the positive things that applied psychology can bring to the world. So I started this podcast last week with our first episode with Dr. Joe Taylor, and I really enjoyed that discussion. Brought a lot away from it, particularly with kind of Joe's thoughts around narrative therapy and listening for hope, and had useful conversations about, when do we time our conversations about hope. And I loved hearing about his thesis research, which looked at the relationship between hope and trust, and his thoughts about hope and shame. So there was a lot to go off on that, and I had some really amazing feedback from Twitter and from the Facebook group about the things that have come up there, particularly about giving me reference to things like reasonable hope and hope in time of adversity. So it's given me stuff to go away and think about, and I hope it's been helpful for the people listening. It's had an amazing reaction on Spotify and YouTube and Buzzsprout, and we're kind of nearing 175, 180 views and listens altogether, which is beyond anything that I thought it would do. So it seems to be least attractive in principle. So thanks everybody for getting in contact. Thank you for following me on Twitter, where I'm kind of basing this podcast from, and that's at Tim C Education. And it'd be great to hear from more people about what's resonated, maybe what's grated on people, and if we've kind of missed anything. Haven't had a lot of the grating stuff yet, but this podcast is about subjective views of things and getting people's opinions and exploring people's practice. So there's got to be difference, and that's a good thing. So on to today's podcast. I will be talking to Dr. Jagdish Barn, and we'll be talking about systemic change and hope. I'm really excited about this. It's something that really drove my interest in the career, and something that I battle with during my training so far. So I'm really interested to see what Jagdish has to say, and how it can take my learning forward, and I hope it's really useful for everybody else. So if you like the podcast, please give it a follow on Spotify or on YouTube. Leave comments about stuff that you think is working, things that you've really liked, things that have resonated, and things that maybe you'd like to ask questions about, and I'll try and respond to those as we kind of go along. Had an amazing response from the Twitter EP community, and I've got lined up about 5 or 6 more episodes in the next 8 weeks. So I'm really excited by this. I hope it lands for some people. It's really helpful. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm a bit nervous, but yeah, just get into it. Okay, enjoy. Hello and welcome to the second episode of Agents of Hope. It's a podcast that I'm hosting. My name is Tim Cox, and I am a trainee educational psychologist, and I started this podcast just last week to hold conversations about the positive things that are happening in applied psychology and education, and to talk to people who I consider to be agents of hope about their ideas about what positive changes could be made in the area that we work. So today I'm joined by Dr. Jagdish Barn, and I guess my first question is, who is Jagdish Barn? Where are you from? And I guess what motivates you in your current practice?
Okay. Hi, Tim. Hi, everyone that's listening. Thank you ever so much for having me on. Can I just first of all say that I really, really enjoyed your past podcast last week with Joe.
Thank
I
you.
thought that was, to have, two newbies into the
Mm,
professions doing it, was lovely. And so one of the reasons I wanted to kind of support this was exactly that, because I've been doing this for 23 years now.
okay.
Yeah, I know I don't look it. But I started when I was 27. Yes, I qualified when I
Okay.
was 27. So, you can figure out on my age from
Mm,
that. I really like the way that, Joe kind of explained where he'd come from last week. So I think narratives are really, really important, and cultural narratives in particular are really
yeah.
important, because if we explain where we're from with the people we're working with our colleagues, there's a co-constructed understanding then, isn't there?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and so people know where you're coming from. And, I'm a very much from the social constructionist point of view, and I think that's
Okay.
really important.
Hmm.
So, if we, look at my narrative, I think, my parents, I'm from Indian Punjabi heritage.
Okay.
And my parents came over here in the 1960s, and they settled in northeast Lincolnshire. And the
Okay.
reason they did that was because it's flat and it's very much like the Punjab. Uh, you know,
Okay.
Great, but for somebody of a different colour growing up in that environment
Mm,
in the 70s in particular, it wasn't such a great experience. So,
okay.
in my early childhood, there was a lot of racism. The far right, the National Front were very, very uh, big at that time.
Hmm.
And for me, that really, really had quite a significant impact on my life and where I wanted to go, on who
Okay.
I was and my identity, really. And so acculturation, or the theory of acculturation, really, really drives me. And I'm going to talk about that, how that links in with
Yeah.
systems. Tuning in, I thinking, oh, she can talk about systems. But I think for me, going forward, it was very much about, well, where do I stand in this, very much kind of obviously white dominated
Hmm.
world, and what does that mean to me? So very early on in my life, I remember very distinctly. I can even smell it now, and it takes me back very vividly to an incident in. I was in probably key stage 1, maybe key stage 2,
Okay.
and I was speaking Punjabi to a couple of kids from my community, because they didn't understand what to do. They
Okay.
didn't understand, and I was told off for doing that,
Right.
by a teacher. Uh, you
Hmm.
know, you're in this country now, so you've got to speak English.
Hmm.
And that really, really affected me. And I thought, no, that's not right, because we should, be, collaborative. We should be, open to everybody. That's not right. So
Hmm.
for me, that drove me to become a teacher. And so I
Okay.
didn't want to become a psychologist at all. It was, to become a teacher. And so I initially trained as a primary school teacher. So I
Hmm.
did the ed, a Bachelor of Education. And I went to teach, and I went to teach in quite a deprived area, but also a very multi-ethnic school, because I wanted to get away from northeast Lincolnshire, where being of a BAME background was a difficulty at that time, and I wanted to be in a more kind of cosmopolitan area. So I taught there, and I encountered lots of different types of need, if you like, as well as strengths.
Yeah.
And because of that, I saw the educational psychologist a lot in school and in my
Okay.
classroom.
Mm.
And she would stay for lunch, which actually in my own practice, I adopted that as well. And I still, like having lunch with school practitioners, because I think you get
Yeah.
a lot out of it.
Yeah.
And so she must think that I hounded her all the time, because I asked her all the time for information, etc. And
Hmm.
from there, I don't, because long story short, from there I went back to do a conversion course in psychology, and I went to London Guildhall and did my conversion course.
Okay.
Then I wrote to all the local authorities. I was living in Essex at the time. I wrote to all the local authorities and said, do you have an assistant educational psychologist job, please?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought, and I think that, again, it's coming back from, my own experience was, you have to do it for yourself. Nobody's going to hand it to you to a plate. So on a plate, sorry. So you have to
Hmm.
do it for yourself. So that's what I did. And Andre Amick in Essex came back and said, yeah, we're setting something up like that. Do you want to come for an interview, apply, etc. So I did
Hmm.
do. and that's, you know, got my foot in the door there.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I then did my master's in Sheffield. I came, you know, I did my BEd in Sheffield, came back there, and that was a really rich experience for me.
Okay.
You know, in a year, doing that in a year, and I really liked the Sheffield course because it was the adult model of learning. So
Okay.
there's no prescribed, if you like, you know, kind of model around it. It was very fluid, and that really, really resonated with me as a person, because fluidity is, you know, what I practice now,
Yeah.
and I consider it as really, really important because it releases your, you know, you're not kind of constrained by any one model.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I eventually ended up at Barnsley as an
Okay.
educational psychologist. I really enjoyed that. Very small team, lots and lots of project work, you know, systemic, if you want to kind of wrap it like that, you know, working with systems, and also work very solution orientated, because we had the opportunity to train with the Brief Therapy Clinic down in London.
Okay. Yeah.
And that really transformed the way I thought, you know,
Okay.
and so solution focused thinking became my way of being, really, not just within the work environment, but within the school,
Mm-hmm.
so within my home environment as well.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I really, really enjoyed that. And then I had my first child, and just like, really, you know, life things happen, don't they, in life? And this was the second big thing in my life that had happened. And I was very ill after I'd had her. And, you know, it really made me think about what I wanted, what I really, really enjoyed, you know, in the work that I was doing. And I think, you know, you have to feel nurtured, don't you? Work has to nurture you, it has to feed your intellectuality, you know, it has to, you know, feed your kind of emotional containment as well. And if it doesn't do that, if it doesn't nourish you in that way all the time, then I think, you know, you should change. You should think about, well, what is it that does give me that? And I knew that the work that I really, really enjoyed was more systems orientated, if you like. You know, so the individual work was powerful. You know, and before we came on here, you talked about, you know, doing that individual work and how you do it gives people hope. But for me, that didn't drive me as much as the other work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's when, in 2006, I set up Focus Psychology.
Okay.
So, you know, 14 years later, here I am,
Okay.
you know, Focus Psychology. And I think now, definitely more than ever, I'm doing the kind of work I want to do. And I do feel very, very nourished, if you like, you know, in that work. So that's kind of a very, you know, quick kind of potted, you know, history. And if I go back to acculturation, I think acculturation is really, really important when you are looking at systems. And I think whatever piece of work we do, there's this kind of I don't know, thinking that systems work is different from other work. It isn't. We're always influencing, you know, a system. Regardless what work we do as psychologists, you're having an influence, aren't you? You're facilitating some type of change. So, you know, if we look at systems, then systems, you know, have been described in all sorts of ways through systems theory. You know, macro, micro, you know, subsystems, a whole system. But I've got my own little judicious theory around that, and it's I like to think of it as a slow cooker. So when you're working, you know, with you know, systems, you're looking at a slow cooker. So with a slow cooker, what you do is you have the different components, so the different subsystems go in. So there might be meat, vegetables, stock, or whatever, and you, as a cook, facilitate how that's going to change through the spices you put in, through the herbs you put in, and you don't rush it. You leave it. It's on there for 8 hours. Okay, leave it, and then and the hope in that, because we are agents of hope, and this is what this is about. The hope is that you're going to create something wonderful at the end of the day for dinner. And as you're, you know, sitting there doing your work or whatever, you can smell the aromas, and the aromas tell you that it's working because the smell is really, really nice. And then eventually you know, the end product is there for you to see. And even then, when the end product is there, you can still facilitate change by manipulating that. And I think that's, you know, for me, that's a simple, it might be quite a simple way, but it's, in a way, it covers the complexities of systems, you know, the subsystems, and how they interact. It's all about interaction, isn't it? It's an interaction of different people. They're organisms, so they're alive. So when we're looking at that, and when we're looking at nourishing that, and feeding that organism, either it's maybe the home environment and how that then links to the school environment, you know, how that links to the community environment or whatever, we're looking at feeding our, I suppose, and nourishing the organism. And so what is that about? Well, we know that organisms need love, don't they? Then they need a sense of belonging. They need agency.
Yeah.
You know? And so for me, when I go into that kind of situation, it's about looking at it from that point of view.
Yeah.
And I think, go on.
Yeah. Just I really like that analogy you made, the metaphor about the slow cooker and it being a long labour of love, really, that sort of kind of change in systems. And when we talk about systems, for somebody who hasn't read systems theory or hasn't looked at Bronfenbrenner or something, I guess we're talking about different kind of, I guess you might see them as communities or however big or small.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about when we talk about systems.
Yes.
But I think reflecting on, I guess a bit my narrative of bringing myself to this role, I guess I came to it with these ideas about social injustices. That I saw. I started training the autumn after the Grenfell Tower tragedy, and I guess I had a huge hunger to play on that metaphor for, something needs to change. Something, there'd been this kind of backdrop of Grenfell, and before that, I guess Trump in America, and then and Brexit, and it was all kind of mixed up, my ideas, I guess, of systems into like, oh, everything's wrong.
Yeah.
And we need to change this. We need to make this stance. And I guess I was more of a stir fry, if not microwave meal exchange, and kind of like those things. I wanted it right here, right now. Change or else. And it was all driven by, I guess it's coming from a similar social construction idea of kind of oppress and oppressor. But what I've found in thinking and writing and practice of that is that sort of thinking leaves the relationships out of it. And as applied psychologists, when we're trainee applied psychologists, those are the centerpiece of our practice. So it is about nourishing that change over time, adding the spice and flavors of the psychology that we could bring.
Absolutely.
And there are some stir fry things that you can do, which might be more individualistic things. But if those don't nourish the system, and they don't bring them back for a hunger for something more nuanced and a bit more progressive and a bit healthier, then I think we're slightly doing things a bit of a disservice. I said to Joe last week, I think, and we agreed that every bit of individual casework can be systemic if you aim the feedback loops right.
Absolutely.
So those things kind of really resonated with me.
And I think
go on.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about there is actually, you've mentioned social constructionism, but I think critical realism, which comes from that, is really, really important here, because it's about not just looking at kind of, the political angle, for that person, the historical, the socioeconomic, etc. But it's also about looking at yourself and actually what you bring to that. So, how is what you are, your identity, what you think, your belief system actually influencing, the way that you are reacting, and, the hypotheses that you are generating to even at that level to test out. So I think it is taking a step back. And, for me, I mean, you mentioned, subsystems, smaller systems. I think sometimes it's about starting there and working with them to develop the resilience within that. So
Mm.
the whole may need doing, but actually that job, you can't just go in there. And I think the language we use is really important. I don't like the word, say, for instance, manage, like behavior management, etc. It's facilitation. We're there to facilitate,
Mm-hmm.
because soon as you manage, you then control, don't you?
Yeah. I
For
mean,
me,
could
that's
you
a similar thing.
could you unpick that a little bit? For, I guess, manage and facilitate are words that EPs might use quite a lot, and there's a tacit understanding of what that means. But for an outsider who was coming to this conversation, what's the difference between managing something and facilitating something?
Okay, so managing something is that you are in control. So you're going in and saying, this is what we need to do, and this is where we need to move to, and this is what you need to do, etc. So that person has suddenly lost agency. And for me, so facilitation is actually saying it's a co-construction. All right. So you are facilitating because you have some specialist knowledge to bring. All right. But that's all you're doing. And then what you're hoping from a solution orientated point of view is that you just start that, and then that will develop as a co-construction together, and everybody will have some agency, feel powerful. So beautiful kind of approaches that I love, and a lot of colleagues use are things like maps and paths. You mentioned the tree of life last week. Those they take time though, so you can't just go in and have a quick meeting. A good path or a map might take a couple of hours, or you need to do it over 2 sessions. So I think the language we use in our conversations is really important. So I like to think that I don't know whether I do it all the time, other people have to tell me, I hope I do, but I like to think that I start off a meeting with, what are your best hopes? Okay. What would you like out of that? So that everybody, and that goes around the table. Okay, obviously, first of all, it would be the young person and parent carers or whatever, but it goes around the table. So even when I'm working on a consultative level with practitioners, colleagues, it will be, what do when you walk out of this this room, how will you know this has been successful? And that's, the basics of solution focused work. So, everybody listening, who are practitioners within that, and I think a lot of our colleagues, education psychologists in particular, this will resonate with them, and they'll think, yes, definitely, that's the way I work. We're very person-centered. So going back to your original question, I think that's the difference between facilitation. It's about letting go of any kind of thinking that you're an expert. You're not an expert. You're a vessel of knowledge, if you like. You're a conduit to movement. And going back to systemic work, that's what that is. It's movement. It's just jigging things around so that you empower movement towards something that somebody or a collective people desire, and it's going to be a positive and hopeful experience for everybody within that during that window of time. And that's something else that I think we need to be very aware of. We only work within a window of time. So things change, things are fluid, and they move forward. And I think if you're constrained too much about, well, no, I need to do it this way, I need to apply this theory here, if I don't, then it won't work. And I think, doing this for 23 years, I can now say, I use lots of things. When I walk into a situation, lots of things are coming at me, and I'm thinking, oh, that makes sense. And yes, I can understand from that point of view, all of this kind of thing. And I think that's a really nice position to be in. Do tell me if I'm rambling on, Tim.
I just what's resonating with me there is something that I thought about quite a lot over the last year. Is the difference between taking an expert position and coming to social constructions with an expertise in something. I guess in consultations or any of the work that I do, really, I guess part of how I introduce myself is I say, well, I think you're the world expert in your life, or the life of your child, or the life of your pupils, because you're doing it day in, day out. And what I bring is some expertise in psychology, and hopefully that can be helpful in planning a way forwards out of what could be a difficult situation, or making a good situation even better. I guess that's how I put it. So I guess it's I don't completely shy away from the word expert, but I'll put the ease
Yes.
on the end of it, because I think, oh, what do I offer? If I'm not bringing the psychology into it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You have to be very clear, excuse me, of, what your knowledge is, and what your specialism is and why you are there. I think we shouldn't lose that. And in fact, I work as an expert witness in the family court.
Okay.
That's a really, really interesting experience, because just, solicitors and people around you, they will, defer to you. And, it's a very different experience from being in schools, where you work, in a much more collaborative partnership, equal way, I suppose, once you get to know schools, because in the way I work, which is, embedded, and, we don't do ad hoc visits or anything, you develop that level of trust. And I think relationships is really, really important, because my area really is trauma, social, emotional, mental health.
Okay.
And that's the kind of specialism, really. And I think, trauma informed theories really, really, drive me around how I then, work systemically as well, with, like I say, the different components of a small system. So it could be just a family dyad, a family dynamic, a domain, or it could be then a wider, for instance, a multi-academy trust. And how do the different schools within that multi-academy trust fit in, and how do they relate to each other? And has somebody come in and just imposed something on top of them? And when we talk about acculturation, which method, where are different schools within that? So have some people, has a school assimilated?
Okay.
Has a school adopted the bicultural integration approach to acculturation? Are they adopting a separation approach? So even, or are they feeling marginalized by, say, whoever's taken them over? And, through the years that I've been working, there's been lots of instances of that. And it's about then speaking to leaders about, have you actually thought about how what's happened is affecting the dynamics of the system? And you can, acculturation, even though we use it for narratives and life journeys, I like to use the same theories in my work with systems. So are people in culture shock? So it could be even one school. I've had a couple of schools. They've had one school, 7 years I've been there. Third head. Within that. So that and it's working within that. There's all sorts of reasons for that happening, but it's about then looking at which areas of the school are coping quite well with that, and what acculturation, how are they coping with that, what acculturation approach are they using to the new things that are happening around them.
So can I just interject a little bit there? Acculturation is a term that I'm aware of. And you've kind of gone through the four parts of that model, but could you just define those four component parts? Because
so basically, acculturation is when we're put into a new situation. So we may move to a new country, or we move to a new the situation I've just described, somebody's taken us over, or a new trust has taken us over, or we move to a new school. What we do is we try and acculturize using different approaches, and these could be different in different domains. So we either integrate ourselves and use a bicultural approach. So we say we're going to keep some of who we are, so some of our own culture, but we're also going to adopt that culture as well. And so it's a co-evolved approach, and you're evolving together. So whoever the dominant, if you like, culture is working with you to kind of develop a joint understanding. So if we look at, the UK as a whole, there are parts of the UK which, minority ethnic groups or BAME, groups or whoever coming in feel more at ease, because they feel that the host community buys into what they are, celebrates who they are, as well as gives, they take and they give. So it's a relationship, it's a give and take relationship, and you feel comfortable. So the separationist approach is actually when you think, no, they're not interested. I'm going to separate from that. So, because they're not interested in, I don't feel comfortable with negotiating with them, talking to them, because they're not interested in who I am or my culture or my identity. But you can have that in different domains. So when I was growing up, I felt that my, school life was quite co-evolved, integration. Because my community didn't feel necessarily that the outside world, that they were in, generally accepted all of who they were. So it was very, very separatist. So the next one is marginalisation. So that's when, either by just forced marginalisation, or you yourself feel like that, you just completely take yourself away from and have your own little domain and work. You feel marginalised, you act marginalised as well. Assimilation is when you completely assimilate to your, to the new situation. So you drop everything that you had before, and you think, well, in order to survive, this is all about survival as well here, Tim. Drop these in order to survive in the best fit of survival, and that's what we do. This is how I'm going to survive, and this is the approach I'm going to take. And these approaches can change throughout your lifetime, or throughout the organism's evolvement. So systems, so they can change throughout involvement.
So you could experience all four of those. So it's not a thing. It's not like, it's that fluidity idea again.
Absolutely.
So it just makes me think. I used to work in a school in Bristol, a very diverse population in there, and we'd work with differences quite often, and that felt really fluid, and it felt that we needed to have a way of understanding, because even though it was a very diverse school in terms of the pupil population, the staff population was predominantly white, middle class, or European. So we had a policy of restorative practice as a way of understanding, and realizing we're not going to get this quite right straight away. And it allowed us to have that awareness, I guess, of even though we were just really applying that restorative approach to justice and wrongdoing in the school, it completely shifted the way that I saw myself as a person, and allowed me to, I guess, assimilate more to different situations, and
So how did it shift the way that you saw yourself as a person then?
Well, I think it encouraged, with the restorative conversations of, what happened, how was I feeling when it happened, who else has been affected, how can I put it right, and how do you make sure it doesn't happen again? It works through kind of, I guess it embedded itself as a cognitive process in my mind of how I reflect on myself, as I was working as a pastoral kind of head of house position there, alongside a teaching head of house. And it just made me reflect on, okay, what are we doing that's not understanding, and engaging in those conversations, and actually being there, not using it as like, you're going to come and you're going to have to do a restorative.
That's right.
It's like, actually, no, I need to have the restorative. It makes it's relational. It really encourages active listening, because with the first two questions, you've got to kind of really understand what they saw happen, and why they saw that. And I just think it's a really healthy way to not resolve difference, but resolve the misunderstanding that comes from difference. Although I'd never say that I'm a great expert or have much expertise in lots of different people's culture, because, like you, I was coming from a social constructionist point of view. It's like, well, we might have an idea about a culture or an ethnicity or a group of people, but that's also influenced at the microsystemic level at the home. So unless I ask the question, how am I going to know?
Yes.
And that, I think that helps in across cultures, but across generations as well, because I was seen as the teacher, the older teacher who must be, 50 or whatever, because he's working in the school.
Ooh, careful now.
And at the top, well, yeah, but at the top, but that's I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
But it helped if I was prepared to engage in that conversation and say, sorry for misunderstanding the situation.
Yeah.
How can we make it better and make sure it doesn't happen again? I think that was really powerful. And we had a very low exclusion rate. I don't think about things and outcomes very much, but we had a real sense of community that, for 98% of the children there, they would be able to engage in those conversations and wanted to, and the other 2% we were still learning. So it puts the responsibility back on the school staff and the adults in that community to also, I guess, trying to assimilate to an understanding of someone else, or might hold a role but also have that understanding. So I think that's a really powerful idea, acculturation, although I've just kind of unpacked my thinking about it now.
Absolutely. And I think you've talked about assumptions, and that aligns with kind of critical realism, kind of always checking in, where am I coming from, and it's about you also talked about learning, and we have to learn. You have to be open to learning all the time, not just learning as in book learning and doing CPD, but learning from others all the time. And I think just being sometimes, instead of rushing in going, yes, I'm going to do this and that, and just being and experiencing the environment you're in is really, really powerful. And for me, it's the conversations I have, it's the way I approach people that it's the most powerful. Because if you don't, if you can't do that, if you don't do that, if you rush into things, then I think you haven't developed that kind of relationship and that relate bit of the work that we do. So I always go back to Bruce Perry's work on this, and Dan Siegel's work on this, which listeners may be aware of. So Bruce Perry talks about it's all about regulating people, relating to people, and it's only when they're regulated, there's relationships, you formed relationships, can you then look at reasoning with people. If you haven't done that, then you can't reason with people, and no matter how much knowledge or expertise or specialism you have, if you don't touch people, not just in their head but in their hearts as well, you're not going to move forward. And in a similar way, Dan Siegel's work, it's all about, I know it's all, very much it's used to work with parent carers of, youngsters who have been through trauma. But I think pace, playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy are really important in all the work we do with the different subsystems, the whole systems that we work with. So I would like to think that if, colleagues in schools and other places I work with describe me, they would say, she's a bit of a joker, bit playful, because I think that's really, really important for me to model that. Often it's been, I've often had people say to me, "Oh, you're not like a psychologist." And I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, you don't act like one." I think, I unpack that, and it's, it's a compliment when I've unpacked it, which is good. But it's about, I suppose, people feeling comfortable and not feeling like, somebody with that psychologist, I'm sure there's listeners that have been mistaken for psychiatrists or whatever, when you come in, by, what is that going to be? So what are people's expectations? And I think collectively as a profession, we have a responsibility to make people feel at ease and, hopeful that the person that's coming into their life, who has to them a form of power for whatever reason, because of who you are, they're comfortable with that, and they're hopeful that actually it's going to be for the better. Whenever they've been through the process, they're going to end up feeling better about whatever it is that I'm there for, if you can see what I mean.
Definitely. I think
I'm thinking while I'm talking now, so there will be pauses and me probably being bumbly.
But I think that's fine. I think that's part of the kind of long form conversations that we want to have as part of this podcast. But something that you were talking about then really interested me about the PACE approach. Do you ever name the component parts of that and say, I am doing this, or you are doing this part of that approach? And how do you model it?
Oh, so say if I go in and, are you talking about, PACE or that kind of, say the model of PACE or whatever?
Yeah.
Yes, I think, I just, that's my being. But obviously if I'm working with, say, a nurture provision, pastoral, social, emotional, mental health setting, it may be, I'd always start off with some kind of solution orientated approach to get them thinking about what they want. So the very first contact I have with senior leaders is, what are your best hopes out of having me in to your organization? What will, so say we start in September, what will next July look like? And that then gives me a very clear idea of where they want to go. And then my next question is, what will, other people in your organization think then? Do they align with that? And, very often it's like, well, I think so. Well, shall we check it out? Okay, so the first checking out is kind of some kind of big, or even in maybe, depending on how big the organization is, even in subgroups, checking out whether what they want, from the experience aligns with what senior leaders want. Okay. And, if it doesn't, I will go back and say it doesn't align. So how are we going to work with that? Okay. And I think because of the organizations I work in, PACE fits really nicely. I think it fits nicely anywhere, but that kind of trauma-informed approach fits nicely. And yes, I will say, this is what we need to be practicing all the time in, our day-to-day language, in our day-to-day non-verbals, in our day-to-day approaches. So it's me modeling that as well. So, observations are interesting. So people say, oh, can you observe and see, whether we're doing it? And I say, well, what am I observing? You can tell me more about your classroom than me going in there for a snapshot. But if you want me to participate and co-do something with you, whether that, co-run a group or whatever, that's a different experience. Because then we can, both of us or a group of us can look at that and, debrief afterwards and coach, do some coaching together about that, peer supervision around that. So I will do that. So there's a lot of, I suppose, active work within the school community or whatever community I'm working with, and then say, well, look, this is what we've done here, and then put whatever the theory is around that, so they understand the modeling around here. Did you see that? Can you see? And solution focus, I've had a lot of success with solution focused coaching, and schools feeling very at ease with that and adopting that. And I think as soon as you start thinking in a solution focused way, and that is your very being, I think those kind of PACE things come, because with that is acceptance, is curiosity, because the whole of solution focused thinking is about being curious. I'm curious, that. Can you unpack that for me? Is one of my, the biggest questions I use. And you have empathy, because you can't do solution focus without having empathy for other people.
So with solution, so there's a subtle difference between solution focused and solution oriented practice, and you've talked about them both. So my understanding is solution focused, you're focused on what are the solutions in this area, and you don't focus on the one foot in the pain and the one foot in the solution. Is that correct?
So in solution focus, so you said you don't focus in one foot in the pain, did you say, in one foot in the solution? I mean, I think both of them, you acknowledge, and you allow that acknowledgement of the problem or the pain or whatever you say. But I think solution focus comes from the therapy bit of that, the solution focus brief therapy bit. Right. Okay. Solution orientation, is, I think, more of a systemic thing and more of a long-term thing. Okay. And I think they're quite interchangeable, and maybe people listening to that may want to come back and say, no, Jagdish, I don't agree. They're curious with that. I think as long as you co-construct a way forward. So I think we can even change, solution to hopefulness, hopeful orientation, given that talking about hopefulness, it's all about hope, isn't it? It's all about moving forward. And that to me, what hope is. So, so yes, so I think solution orientated, I use solution orientated a lot. With that, and maybe I'm interchanging it with focused as well. But what I mean by that is actually we're working towards, whoever I'm working with, it's a joint venture. It's a joint journey towards some type of solution that that person wants.
Okay.
Sometimes we want it together.
That's a really helpful summary, because I think I kind of had an intuitive thing about the solution focused. I thought, maybe that's just a bit kind of, because Joe talked a lot last week about kind of people coming in, the use of positive psychology in a tyrannical way, and saying, listen to your strengths, what you're really good at, and it doesn't resonate because it's not it genuine to the problem. But that way of thinking about solution focused stuff, or hope oriented, or however you want to and underpin it with your values or the processes of your practice, was really helpful for me to kind of tease out the value in both those approaches.
And I think it's asking the question, are you stuck? Would you like to be unstuck?
Yeah.
And if you want to be unstuck, kind of a solution orientated journey, because it's to be unstuck you need some solutions, don't you? And I think the other model you've kind of you've just been talking there, that I like to use on top of that is the cycle of change. I don't know if you've heard of that. Chaska, and Declemente. So when I look at that, I think, well, are these parent carers, or are these subset of teachers, or this subsystem, are they at the pre-contemplation stage? In which case, me coming in and going, let's go for it, guys, is not going to be very, very helpful. So you've got to pace yourself with where people are, and start with where they are, and who's asking for movement, so are those people ready for movement? In my court work, I do this a lot, because people want, people to move for obvious reasons, because, there's, children are in very, very vulnerable situations. And whatever they've thrown at parent carers may not be working. So it's very much about thinking, well, are they at pre-contemplation? Have they just started contemplating that they need to change? And is that forced contemplation? Are they now at the preparing stage? And this is all emotional, not just, physical. Are they at the action stage? But after the action stage, of course, you've got maintenance, and that's a very, very difficult stage to maintain, because you need to maintain, for at least a good period of time. 6 months is, seen as a good period of time, 3 to 6 months. And then you could have relapse. But you see, that's a learning opportunity. So, and all of these models that I like to use are not quick fix models. They are, take time. And that's why I think the slow cooker approach to everything is really, really important. And, I'm forever kind of, when I do my court work, working with wonderful colleagues in, social care, social workers, and, the legal profession, going, yes, I know that you've got on this timeline, but that's not going to happen straight away, because you've only started this. And emotionally, you can't force people to work through that really, really fast, especially when they were way over there. And what your constructs are around change are over here. Then the movement has to, be quite at pace with everybody, and really the people that you're working with, not at your pace. And that's difficult. I know that's difficult.
And it brings back to mind your slow cooker analogy of like, we're going to have, this is a long and tender approach to doing something. I guess what I was just thinking when we were talking then about that cycle of change, I've always struggled a little bit with that psychology, not because I don't think it's useful. I think it's evidence-based, and it's helpful, and a lot of people I know use it. But there's something intuitively within me, which I feel like I need to understand. A, whose change is it?
Absolutely.
So whose goal are we going for?
Mm-hmm.
And why someone might not be all in for that straight away.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I've been exploring in my practice at the moment, particularly around social emotional mental health needs.
Mm-hmm.
I've been exploring the human givens as a framework,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to work with teachers to and parents to understand why a child might be exhibiting behaviours which they don't understand or they don't value,
Mm-hmm.
or are actually, in a critical realist way, they are disruptive to learning. So I use that kind of emotional needs, because they say we've got 10 emotional needs or so, and map out how in the classroom or at home they're fulfilling those needs,
Mm-hmm.
and is it in a appropriate way. So you're bringing in that social construction within the
Mm-hmm.
system. Is it appropriate here for them to do that, or is that need not being met at all, or is
Mm-hmm.
it being met in a socially inappropriate way,
Mm-hmm.
and what might help? I guess using those kind of, there's a bit of problem analysis in that and a bit of
Yeah.
solution oriented sort of
Mm-hmm.
thinking, and it's been helpful to think of things like that. But I don't know what you think of that sort of kind of
Well,
deep dive
absolutely.
analytical.
So I'll just answer that, and then I'll go back to the cycle
Mm.
and and unpack that with you a little bit. I think
Yeah.
you're looking at exceptions all the time, aren't you? Well, what are the exceptions? To that child being able to
Yeah.
do. I've been really interested on Twitter at the moment. There's lots of people, you probably picked up on this, saying that their children are actually happier now that they're not at school, and they're doing their learning, but they're not constrained about having to do it in a certain place. So I think it's all about agency and control, isn't it? And I think when we look at exceptions, it invariably leads to that. The exceptions are when they feel at ease within themselves. So go right back down to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, really. If those are met, and I know, some people, would argue, and there's been lots of critiques about that, but generally it's the same as choice theory or all of that. There's certain needs, and if those needs are met, we feel, at one with ourselves. So your approach, it's about looking at that. So where are the exceptions? Those kind of emotions, we are more emotionally literate and more emotionally aware when we feel nourished, with regards to not just nourished as in food, but generally nourished around, by society around us, by our interactions, when we feel regulated. So I think, going back to that cycle, you're absolutely right. Who wants that change? And sometimes, unfortunately, because there are vulnerable youngsters at stake or whatever, then there will be another body wanting maybe certain people to have that change. And I think that's the same in schools, because if we look at secondary schools, year 10, we need you to knuckle down, we need to get on with the work, because you're not going to get your GCSEs, and that year 10 may not be there. So when you're looking at that, you're thinking, well, where is that year 10? Where do they sit within what their understanding is of this particular system, and where do the other systems, the other subsystems in the other domains of their life, where do they fit in? And actually, are you all triangulating? Are you singing from the same hymn sheet, or are the hymn sheets very, very different? And I think that's what we do, isn't it? As psychologists, we come in and try and, for whoever or whatever, pull that together and facilitate that change, and kind of make it meaningful and make it hopeful for everybody within that. So everybody's co-constructing, instead of just on their own little journey wherever they're going. So I think for the cycle, for me, for the cycle of change, I'd like not just one person, or the person that's the target, or the couple that's the target, or whatever, but for the system around that also to be changing. So when I come in, it's about, well, actually, hello, say social work or whatever, what are you doing that to facilitate that in a different way, instead of maybe sending them off to yet another parenting course. Let's look at it differently.
Yeah.
You know, actually, what are their strengths? Because there's lots of strengths, and what actually we need to target. So a more bespoke way of looking at things. But of course, it takes resources, it takes time, and you know that doesn't always happen.
But it sounds like time well spent.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
I think if to me, if I can change even a little bit of thinking towards offering other people hope and advocacy, then I think I've been successful.
Yeah.
You know, obviously I'd like, you know, for somebody to go, yes, I think you're absolutely right. Let's, you know, put, you know, for affirmation. But we, you know, I don't think, I think if you're in this job for affirmation all the time, you're in the wrong job.
Yeah.
I think it's about, you know, sharing, giving of yourself, and, you know, trying to facilitate again. It facilitates that big word, isn't it? Movement towards hope, whatever hope looks like for that person. And that again is, what does that hope look like for you? Because it'll be different for different people, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely. As you're kind of talking there, I'm just thinking through, okay, hope theory is a central part of my practice, and I guess I've synthesized it to ecological kind of systems kind of theories. But before, I think, if I was going to use your slow cook analogy, the first thing that I do it's sort of reading the recipe book of that person and using a psychodynamic theory, container contains, the idea of like, do I understand this person's needs, and do the people around them respond to them appropriately?
Yes.
Because that's one thing that it's like, it seems common sense, but I think although that's a psychological theory in itself, we can bring applied psychology to bring about a new understanding and a new perspective through those reframings, or you get this, particularly when I'm using Human Gibbons' approach to do that, or using sort of kind of Bruce Perry sort of emotional states ways of understanding emotional mental health difficulties in children, I often get this sort of you feel it within the consultation, this kind of awakening moment to, oh my goodness, that makes sense. And you really see the power in psychology there of, okay, well, if that's it, then I can be slightly softer in my approach, and that pace approach, or the the relate, can't remember off the top of my head now, the Bruce Perry one that you spoke.
Regulate, relate, and then reason.
That's the one. Becomes a really helpful idea. Ooh, I've lost you there. Hello. Can you hear me?
I can. Sorry,
I lost you there.
Lost you there. Sorry.
That's fine. I stopped when it went blank. So yeah, I think I was whittling on about contained or something.
No, you were talking about Bruce Perry, weren't you? The and how I think you were formulating, what process that you go through in your consultation, really.
Yeah. I think, what I was going to say beyond the Bruce Perry is that becomes the part of the solution in itself, just even that different approach. And that playfulness and all of those sort of things, it seems really powerful. I was thinking as well, when we're talking about that, we're in the middle of a relatively traumatic experience for a lot of people, and we've got children in a different setting than we would normally see them, although it's the one that they spend most of their time in usually, but in a different context. And so I guess the EPs that I'm working with and other TEPs that I've got contact with are saying that the role has changed to be, I guess, perhaps more direct with parents and applying similar psychologies. So have you had that experience since this started, and what advice would you be given about those
Yeah,
approaches?
for me, I think the one thing that's become really apparent, during the current situation is that we need to slow down and take time.
Okay.
I think when it first started, and even now, I think, everybody kind of was rushing around, lots of wonderful things came out, from our community, lots of lovely blog posts and podcasts,
Mm.
etc. But actually, I think for me, it was about, well, do people want this, or do they want just space to adjust? It's about being in people's face, or actually,
Mm-hmm.
being around so they can come to you if they need to. Obviously, there are certain protocols around at-risk and vulnerable youngsters that do need
Mm-hmm.
checking in all the time. But I think there's a period of adjustment, isn't there? I mean, I go back to acculturation again, where you
Yeah.
need people just to adjust. And even now, when you are thinking about, your schools, certain families, you'll find that, people are maybe getting into more of a rhythm, okay,
Yeah.
and starting to cope better. I think there's been lots of stuff online about the grief cycle, and in a
Yeah.
way, that's what this is, isn't it?
Mm.
For unfortunately for some people, a lot more serious than
Mm.
just having to go through
A
this,
change. Yeah.
the change, the lockdown, the school closures. And I think, you can, I had to stop myself into going into overdrive myself, with clients, and had to think, well, actually, part of this is about my own self-care.
Mm.
Because if you do go into overdrive, and you yourself are, probably going to burn out. And part of this is actually, what do my clients need from me at this present moment? Okay, I need to ask that instead of
Mm.
going in that. Do you want me around? If you don't, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
How do you want me around? So initial, very gentle email, leave it alone. Then come back after a while, checking in email, just like you would, I suppose, in the work that we do generally. So
Mm.
it's about checking in and then saying, okay, you need some information on this. I'll provide this information for you.
Okay.
And
So
I
you're.
think for me, as a third person, I'm a conduit, or, not a direct person leading into that. So it's
Mm.
about me facilitating that change for parent carers, for instance, young people, through the work I'm doing or do with
Mm-hmm.
staff or whoever else, social workers or whatever. So because they're the ones contacting on a regular
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, go on.
Yeah. So no, I'm just kind of. I guess I'm interjecting to name what I'm hearing. It sounds like you're working through that, relate, regulate, and then do
Reason.
something rational, reason with
Yeah,
somebody.
yeah,
And that's really lovely to hear. It's like tacitly, it's interwoven. It's a golden thread of your practice.
yes.
But that's a really helpful way to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you need to think about, I myself have got two teenagers in the house,
Okay.
so it's
Mm.
about, for me, what has this change brought?
Mm-hmm.
What do they need from me as not just a mother? It's taking my psychologist hat off, really, and, humility, really. I mean, that's what we're about. And it's about,
Mm.
sometimes taking that hat off and thinking, no, actually, I need to, I always show who I am, me as a person, to everybody I work with, and saying, actually, I've got, two kids that I need to be,
Yeah.
um, sorting out or helping, or what, facilitating, or whatever you want to, whatever they need. And actually, they've got into their own rhythm now, so it's easier. But early on, everybody was in this flux, and I think,
Yeah.
well, it was a shared experience, and I think we need to acknowledge that, and think about, well, actually, how am I experiencing it? So if I'm experiencing it in this way, then other people will be experiencing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think it's about self-care, really. And I think a lot of my work with staff in particular is about self-care, because I
Mm-hmm.
think schools feel very, very under pressure, quite rightly, and that they have to deliver. But actually, what are they delivering, and what is the important bit that they have to deliver
Yeah.
systemically? We're back to systems again, aren't we? How has your system changed now? And it's big,
Mm.
huge,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah. And I think it's kind of that change and that shift towards your more emotive supportive side of school, you know, there was a article in the Guardian that's gone around the kind of my Twitter echo chamber, at least, talking about well, schools isn't all about testing, is it? Now it's clearly that this has happened, that, you know, the tide of testing's gone out, and we are in a situation where, you know, schools have become about care and about understanding people again. And although I think there's a politicizing of that, which is not necessarily totally helpful all of the time, because it decontextualizes what's going on for people. I think we should celebrate those emotional sides of school, whether that being, you know, playfulness, accepting, or, you know, working through those things and saying those are key skills to what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we, you know, go back, and it's about, for me, preparing, you know, when we go back, actually, it's not necessarily going in and doing things with the youngsters, but it's actually checking in, are staff okay? You know, because they're going to be the facilitators. So there's a lot of planning going on about what are we going to do, you know, for our young people, our children and young people. Are actually my focus is what are we going to do for the staff? How are we going to check in with the staff? You know, where are they on with coping with this? Say, let's take the grief cycle, for instance. You know, what's happening in their lives. Let's look at that first, and then, because they can't reason then, can they? They're not able to reason if we don't support them in regulating first. And so that's, you know, the conversations I'm having with senior leaders are very much around that. You know, we need to regulate. We need to ensure that the people that are going to be there doing the support of our young people and children are themselves, you know, feeling okay about that, you know, feeling emotionally contained and able to do that. And I think that's really, really important. So it's responsive. So it's not directive. This is what we're going to do. This is our policy, whatever. It's responsive to what's happening, and each organism, each system, each subsystem I'm working with will be very different.
Yeah, I mean, it bring it back to, I guess, the hope ideas that I was talking about with Joe last week about there being like an intuitive, emotional hope, an evidence-based hope, and experience-based hope. It sounds like what you're talking about is working in a really kind of relational way around the intuitive element of it right now, and being aware of that timing of hope, which is something me and Joe talked about as well, and using those things as frameworks is really helpful for me to think, oh, that is what I might do intuitively, or maybe that's what I need to do a bit more of, rather than running to the, you know, big wow, this is what we need to be doing, and this is how we need to change our schools for when people come back to it, because it's working for those systems.
And my feeling is, you know, schools will need a period of stability and going back to normalcy, just like all of us will. You know, so all of this talk of when we go back, we need change. They don't need that at the moment. You know, that will come. You know, and there's also much bigger, you know, politically, socially, what are we going to do about all of that? You know, not just about schools. They're just one, you know, subsystem of a big, you know, countrywide system that obviously needs change, because what's coming out very clearly is the unfairness, the inequality, the injustice of it all. You know, and I think one thing that Joe said last week that really resonated was there is wisdom and possibility in suffering, he said. You know, and I think, you know, I would love that. You know, there is wisdom and possibility in suffering, definitely. And I think, you know, out of this will come that, and out of that will come hope. You know, and I think that I don't know if I answered that question you had about, what are we doing? You know, what should we be doing now? Clearly enough, but you know, my feeling is, well, maybe let's just go with the flow and not pre-plan too much. You know, I'm not saying don't think about things and think about, well, what will it look like, but let's just work with our communities. And you know, we've all got good, you know, relationships with whoever we're working with, and so, and if we have got good they will come to us to see that out, you know. Obviously there's some, fantastic things that have come out, that people have shared and people have said, thank you, that's been really, really useful. That's great. But to,
Mm.
you know, just be too directive and be too in people's faces at this present moment, I think will probably cause more harm than good.
Yeah, it brings me to those kind of ideas, I guess, about whether we're transformative or whether we draw pragmatism as a stance. And for me, I would say that my work is transformative in its vision, that there can be positive, hopeful change in people's life, but actually the nuts and bolts of those are drawn in pragmatism, and that's part of understanding what's useful and of value to people and what's theoretically sound. And what I'm hearing from somebody who isn't as much of a newbie as I am is that that's refined itself and honed itself over time. So it's just part of how you are and who you are now, and you are driven by the values and the experiences that you've experienced so far. So that's really kind of encouraging and helpful so far in this conversation.
Yeah, you've put that really neatly. And yes, and I, from doing this, when I was thinking about this, I think this has been, and it, even through this experience now, it's been really lovely for me to kind of myself reflect on that and think, well, who am I? Where have I come from? Where am I going? And why am I practicing the way that I'm practicing? And it's having, and it's going back to that nourishing. I feel nourished. I wouldn't practice in that way if it didn't nourish me. I would, and I have moved from the way I've practiced over the 23 years to get to this point, to feel that comfortable. And it is movement. And it, initially you do take on board everything and try and, balance it out and think, oh, well, do I agree with this? Do I not agree with that? And obviously I'm in private practice now. So I have a lot of control over what I do and what I choose to take on and what work I won't do, and that obviously supports this nourishment element, also supports me being the slow cooker psychologist, if you like, I do take on work that, will, I suppose, support that approach and allow me to practice that approach. Whereas, other pieces of work, they're time limited, so maybe necessarily you can't do it in that way. But you can put elements into that, of that, curious questioning, solution focused thinking, thinking about what are the positives and hope in the change that we're trying to facilitate for other people, thinking about pace, relationships and regulating other people, developing those relationships before you start to kind of look at the reasoning.
That's really helpful. And although you are now in that private sphere, I imagine those things are honed within the services that people who are training now and people who are working now will.
Absolutely. Right back from when I started as an assistant psychologist in Essex, worked with some fantastic colleagues, my supervisor, my mentor, Geraldine Rowe, phenomenal, excellent, let me kind of really, really develop my own practice and facilitated that. Again, facilitation is another word there. Went to Barnsley and again had some fantastic colleagues there. Tim Cox, the principal when I was there, fantastic. Worked with Tony Manzini again. A friend and colleague of mine. All of that really, really kind of helped. Sue Reardon really, really helped in creating the psychologist I am now and giving me opportunities to and going, oh, okay, you got that idea, well, run with it then. And I think it's about that. I think when you are a leader, if you allow other people to do that, and I think it's really exciting, because you can't, new people coming into the profession, young people coming into the profession, because you can become quite staid and, doing the work that you do because it's easy and it's habit forming, etc. To have other people coming in and going, oh no, I've got an idea. That's, I think it's really nurturing again. Nurturing as nurtures the organisation, but also nurtures individuals really. And also that's a form of movement, form of learning. You're always learning. I always say I'm learning from everybody, not just from, colleagues and stuff, but
Yeah.
learning from youngsters, the children, the parents, the carers, whatever.
Yeah.
Learning from
And
my own children, from my own family,
yeah.
and I think that's really, really, for me, that's really important.
Yeah.
So having that balance of my personal life and my professional life, and it being balanced, that is really, really important. Again, that's about self-care. And I think in this job, especially in, the Labour Party was in power, so lots of money sloshing around, so in a way, when I trained as an ed psych and when I first started, so that decade for me was wonderful, because we could do a lot of systemic project work because there was money to do that, and I think now it is, I would say a lot more demanding, the role, because of the austerity measures that have, I don't want to politicize this conversation too much, but we all know it is more demanding. And I think now more than ever, self-care and a balance between your home domain and your work domain is really, really important. Otherwise, you can't do this work because you feel you feel burnt out, and you can't feel open enough to others' points of views, because you become enclosed. As soon as we feel stressed, we become enclosed, don't we? And we're so regulation, you need to make sure that in your personal life, your relationships allow you to regulate and reason as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a big learning curve for me, certainly, in my career in education. And, often found myself in situations where the things I thought were rational weren't quite happening. And perhaps that was because I wasn't regulated, and those relationships were starting to falter because I wasn't in them, because I wasn't quite right in myself. So I think that's really helpful. And I think that's one of the positive things perhaps about this terrible pandemic that's going at the moment, is that people are finding out what regulates them, and are a little bit more in touch with themselves and what they'd like to achieve once we're out, when we're out. If it's okay, Jagdish, if I move on to some questions.
Yeah.
I think one that we got from Dom Fitzpatrick, who's a Newcastle TEP, we've kind of answered a little bit, but he asks how might we use hope and other theories to bring about systemic change post COVID-19. He observes that there's lots of positivity going around at the moment, and how can we take that positivity forward with us as a society and as systems, and try to understand what we can learn from the bad things that are happening now and make positive changes systemically.
So I'm just unpacking that. Really.
Three questions,
one, isn't it? That's a big one.
I mean, I can make an attempt at.
Yeah, go on, and then while I'm formulating that, you start, and then I'll.
Yeah, I think systemic change. I mean, I think there'll be a lot of political calls for systemic change, which are attractive or unattractive for whatever reason, given the way that you look at the world. But imposing those on the systems that we work in without thinking about the relationship can be difficult and marginalising for people if you're using that acculturation idea. So I think it's I'd define what we mean by systems, and what we use the pragmatism idea of, like, what can we actually do and bring from our role to bring about systemic change. B, set yourself for it to be a slow cooked dinner rather than a stir fry or microwave dinner. C, using kind of hope theories, is like, okay, have a clear idea with the people you work with what goal they'd like to do and how that's helpful for their system. And then with that kind of secondary question you came on earlier would be like, do the other people in the system agree? Because
absolutely,
you can have a lovely progressive conversation with the Senko, but if the TAs or there's teachers who don't want that change to happen and aren't ready, using that Prochaska idea, you're gonna struggle. So it's like, okay, what's the low hanging fruit which can go towards the big dream? Then I'd be thinking about pathways thinking. So what different ways can they think of doing it? So drawing on solution focused stuff, I guess, and kind of their sense of agency, and their kind of intuitive sense. Can I do it? Can I not? What's the emotions around this? So using those relationships to set where we are before we think about there's this big rational goal that we should all be doing, and going towards that. So that's how I'd look at that question, really.
Yeah, and I think for me, yes, you're absolutely right. There will be kind of, call for big systemic change, the macro systems, but I think as a practitioner, you have to be very clear about what can you actually facilitate change in your role, and change that will be meaningful. So it's about authentic, meaningful work, isn't it?
Authenticity.
So what is it? And I think, again, just hold back and think and reflect before you go in there. So even before your first conversation. So, when you're going back into when schools reopen, you may have had email conversations or, Zoom conversations or whatever, but it's actually thinking about where is this system or subsystem, whereabouts are they? And using that critical realism angle again, and thinking, well, what meaningful role can I bring to this in this present moment? Because remember, we're only working windows. We work in windows. We don't work in, big, changes, because it's small changes, isn't it? We work in window in time, and then we work in another window in time, and hopefully then it kind of slots together. And again, it's a process. And a process. I think that's, whereabouts are we in that process? So change may have already started for some people. It's like this old solution focused or solution orientated way of thinking. If you're going to have that conversation, you're already thinking, aren't you? So change has already started. So it's about going in, not zooming in quickly, but really thinking about where at that present moment you will have the most impact for that system or for those people to move forward in the direction that they would like to move forward in.
Absolutely. I think I think that's the agency part that I left out. What I'm saying is that, these people, it's the people you work with have to be confident about making those changes, those little changes. And we might be, I guess part of our own slow cooking as people is that we might be just kind of putting ourselves in kind of echo chambers and communications about big social change needs to happen right now. But then as applied psychologists, like, what can we apply in the window of time that we've got? And I guess how we are within those windows is really important. So it's definitely.
I think a lot of us will want to come back and feel like we're doing something. We're psychologists again, I suppose. Whereas actually we're always psychologists, aren't we? My girls will say to me, "Oh God, Mum, can you not be a psychologist?" But I say, I can't not be one. And I think we're always psychologists, but people want to, by doing, it's affirmation that you're kind of supporting, helping, being meaningful to somebody. Sometimes by not doing, you're still being meaningful to somebody. You don't have to actually be doing anything necessarily. It's just responding to them and having that curious question. Okay. And moving them forward in their thinking without actually doing too much. I don't know how to describe it. Work, if you like.
I mean, there's always, going I guess to Roger's ideas of those kind of 3 therapeutic principles of empathy, congruent understanding, and unconditional positive regard. Although I think unconditional positive regard is difficult it's going to be conditional because we're working in windows, so we're not just staying with somebody in a therapeutic relationship for weeks and months and years.
But I suppose what you're doing is you are empowering that in the schools, the systems, or whatever you're working in, for them to have that, work towards that unconditional positive regard. So acceptance of the person, non-judgmental, non-threatening, of this, of people, being of the situation, and being non-threatening to people as well. So in that way, yes, you're right about, we haven't got a long-term, maybe, us as a, agents of change or agents of hope haven't, but actually we want to engender that in the systems we work in.
Yeah.
Am I making sense, Tim?
Absolutely. It's just I'm thinking as we go. The second question that I had, which was from, let me just check. I want to make sure that I'm giving people shout outs when they ask me a question, from Naomi Milliken. She asks, she's interested in becoming an EP, and she's an assistant at the moment. How, she wants to know how the EP role could be used more effectively in schools, and are we undervalued and underused as a profession? That's a massive question, but I think it's worth giving it a shot.
Yeah, I think, are we undervalued as a profession? Probably, but who's, where does where does it lie? Who does that lie with? Where does why are we like that? Is it us as a profession? Have we kind of undervalued ourselves? Are we proactive enough in telling other people what we do? Or are we undervalued by others, even if they do know what we do? I don't know whether they do, but just from my own experience, when early on, when I went into private practice, schools and other organisations had a very clear understanding, they felt, of what an ed psych does, and that's they come in, they do an assessment, and then they write a report, and then they go away. And that's not what I was about. And very often schools would call up and I would go in and do a presentation, and they'd think, well, no, that's not what we want. And so I honed my skills with that, and it became quite prescriptive, I suppose, in my website, and before I even kind of went on a visit, to say, well, actually, this is what we're about. This is what I'm about. It's about, it's not about me going in and doing lots and lots of assessments and diagnosing. That's not what I do. I work in a different way to empower, empower curiosity, empathy, and help you move forward in your kind of capacity and capability. So I think it's two ways. I think, schools, I think it's overarching structures, isn't it, about what schools need in order to get forward, in order to access funding. And that's part of that question as well. And so I think our skill set is maybe undervalued just because people are constrained about what they need. And I go back to my early years as an ed psych, people were constrained because actually there was so much, there's much more money, not so much, much more money, watching around, whereas you could do lots of other work, and that kind of opened up possibilities, and people didn't need to pay for those possibilities. It was, as far as schools saw it, free to them. So that meant actually maybe now we're more constrained. I mean, some schools I know don't even have an educational psychologist, coming into the school, for various reasons, because of the way that we now work. So I think, yes, I would say we're undervalued, but where the fault, if you like, lies with that. I think we need to, but we've been doing this for years, actually decades, ever since I was an ed psych, all kind of looking at, well, are we undervalued? What do we do? And I think we're quite eclectic.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difficulty. We're quite eclectic, aren't we?
Yeah.
In our practice, there'll be people listening going, oh, well, this is great, Jagdish, but I don't really agree with how you practice, which is great, fair enough, And there were other people going, oh, that's quite interesting. I'd like to know a bit more about that, which is great. And other people going, I do a bit of both. And maybe that's why that question came on board. I don't know why that person.
Yeah, maybe. I think I've got a couple of reflections on that from what you've been saying and the question. It's like, it depends where we see our value being, and if we're a humble, relational, profession which brings an expertise of things which happens in windows rather than kind of long form. It's relationships, but it's kind of, you see each other now and then.
Yeah.
Then it's hard to put your finger on that, and we're okay with that. We're okay with that long-term relationship with causality or correlation. We're not ever saying, I did this, so this happened, and your school didn't exclude anybody that week.
Yeah.
Because schools and young people and developments is chaotic and difficult to order into, I did this, so that. So I think we can't say we come in and do this thing, because everybody's doing everyone's different pathways of thinking about how they're going to do the job. But my view is like, well, we do bring hope to that. I think that's the combining factor. And that's, that was kind of part of why I wanted to set up this podcast, was to have conversations which celebrate the difference between people who and go beyond positioning yourself, I want to be a systemic worker, I want to be an individualistic worker, or I want to use assessment, or I want to use consultation. Well, it's a broad church, but that's a good thing. And I'm hoping that the Agent of Hope podcast allows people to explore those values that underpin different people's work and help people to reflect and be hopeful about, okay, I might be different from Jagdish, or I might be different from Tim or Joe Taylor or whoever I have on next, and say, okay, the eclecticism is actually a strength of what we do.
I totally agree.
And we've got 14 different training providers, lots of different regions in England, and then in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. And I'm yet to meet an EP or an educational practitioner who's not hopeful and doesn't want the best for things in an ideal world. But we have to be somewhat pragmatic about how we are and aware of ourselves. So, yeah, I think
that's absolutely. I hope that people listening to me and listening to Joe and whoever else you have on next, go away and self-evaluate, self-reflect, especially, now that we're in a period where maybe we're not working full pelt like we normally do, and think, well, actually, what kind of practitioner am I? And am I nourished by that, or do I need to think about that and reflect on that, and where do I want to go, and who do I seek out? And we all work together. We all work. It's only a small profession. Still, we're only a small profession, and it's really important that we do work together. We co-construct generally on a bigger way together. We have respect for each other, and I think this comes up on EPNET a lot, doesn't it? Let's have respect regardless of whether we agree with each other or not, and we allow other people to have differences in opinions and reflect on that, but not too harshly on, in a way, especially on public forums, and be respectful of other people's differences, because differences are really, really key. If we didn't have differences, we wouldn't move forward, would we? We'd be stuck all the time. That drives us to think in a different way. So I think again, it comes back to that kind of respect, relate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nourish yourself, nourish each other. Yeah. But I don't want to sound like not that there's nothing wrong with being a hippie, but you know what I mean, kind of a hippie psychologist. But it's about that, isn't it? It's about supporting each other emotionally as well as practically. There's been a lot of practical support at the moment, but actually there's been a lot of emotional support of each other, which is really nice to see. On various forums, on Twitter, and people replying to each other. Really, really great to see. And actually, people saying, "I'm not feeling too good at the moment." Maybe people that wouldn't never ever say that, saying that as well, which is, their personality and their personalness, if you like, coming out, which is really, really nice.
Yeah. And I think there's also credit to saying that, we tend to go and think about the systems that young people are developing in, but we've also developed in our own system,
Absolutely.
and we developed in our own slow cooker,
Yeah.
and we might not be the finished meal yet. And it's just, part of it is just having the curiosity and humility to try other things and say, oh yeah, that actually, resonates through me and is written through me like a stick of rock, and
Absolutely.
it only, it came, I guess my light bulb moment about hope came 11 years into me working the education system, because the community gave me the time to think about that and to draw on those values. So I'm hoping I take that forward, and it's helpful for other people to hear these sorts of stories.
Yeah.
We're rushing up on 90 minutes.
Gosh, that went fast, didn't it?
It is. And I've really enjoyed this conversation, but do you have any kind of concluding remarks? Or
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to say, picking up on your last point, really, don't be frightened, to all those, especially to those young, like yourself, education psychologists, don't be frightened to try new things out, and even, do things that maybe others might kind of say, oh, what are you doing that for? Just do it. As long as you're ethical, your practice is ethical, be curious and move the way that you want to move, and, have those sometimes honest and difficult conversations with, managers and, other people in systems that you're working in, to say, well, actually, I don't agree, but I'd like to try this. Because if you don't do it, then you look back in 23 years time, Tim, you look back and you don't want to be looking back and going, I wish I'd tried. I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd gone, so I think that's my shout out, even to people who have done 23 years or even more than that. If there's something that you think, no, I really want to do that, go and do it, because you only have one life, really.
Yeah.
And I think
absolutely.
you need to feel nourished, and this is a brilliant profession to be in.
Yeah, I agree.
Like you, I feel so privileged, so lucky, full of gratitude to be doing the job I'm doing, really. So that's really my final point to make, really. And enjoy yourself and laugh often and smile.
I try. That's right. I mean, I guess I conclude by saying that I've really enjoyed today's conversation. I've learned a lot about acculturation and solution-focused and solution-oriented practice, but also the importance of that kind of emotional experience of what we do and applying those frameworks that you've talked about so eloquently. So those definitely some things I go away in my practice and try to develop. And it's certainly, I mean, the things I think I might do anyway, but to have the explicit knowledge of it, hopefully that means it's like more, it's front and center of my practice, rather than just, oh yeah, I kind of do that sort of thing. So thank you so much. And you can follow Jagdish on Twitter, if that's okay, at Focus Psychology.
I might change it to the Slow Cooker Psychologist.
Well, that's certainly what I'm going to call this.
I thought, oh, that's quite good, isn't it? Yeah. Nobody copyright that. That's mine now. Those people out there think, oh, that's quite good. It's mine.
Okay.
But no, it's at Focus Psychology on Twitter.
Okay. And you can follow me at Tim C Education, or follow the podcast on Spotify or YouTube or any of the places that I've tried to put it up. But I shall obviously put that more on Twitter. So we'll leave it there, but that's okay. Thank you very much, Jagdish.
Thank you very much.